Hi, it's Robbin McMahon here. I'm the host of Parenting Our Future. And if you're listening to this podcast, I want to thank you so much for being here. I also want you to know that I am a former angry mom. I used to yell and rage and threaten and punish my kids because I wasn't getting the cooperation or the behavior that I felt I should be getting. And I struggled for many years not knowing how to change or knowing what to do differently. It wasn't until I found the world of peaceful parenting that I learned why my kids acted the way they did, and also why I was so angry and triggered. I was able to heal my anger and leave my triggers behind so that I could focus on being the calm and confident parent I always expected myself to be. I can tell you that feeling connected to your kids is the best feeling in the world. My two boys are teenagers now, and we have a strong relationship that is rooted in deep connection. And where there is connection, there's cooperation. Parenting is the most important job we do, but it's the hardest job we do. And we do it without understanding the fundamentals of the way our kids grow and develop. And we do it without knowing the way their brains work or what their behavior is actually really telling us. So it's no wonder it's so hard. And it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to say, this is harder than I thought it would be. And that's where I come in. I can help you and I can support you so that you can have the cooperation and enjoy being a parent. You can book a free call with me on my website, parentingforconnection.com. And if you want to download my free guide, How to Turn a No into Cooperation, go to triggerfreeparents.com. I really hope you enjoy the show. Thanks for listening. Hi, everybody. It's Robbin here. Welcome back to Parenting Our Future. Okay. So many of the clients that I work with, so many parents that I know have a child with ADHD. And I had no idea up until this moment that there was really a connection between the foods that our kids eat and ADHD. And this relates to the gut and all things. And I'm really excited to have a special guest on today to walk us through all of this. So I have Dana Kay here, and she's a board certified holistic health and nutrition practitioner. She is the CEO and founder of the ADHD Thrive Institute and creator of the ADHD Thrive Method for Kids program. She's also a mom to an ADHD child who's 13, and she knows firsthand the struggles that come with parenting a neurodiverse child, but she also knows the freedom that's possible once parents learn to reduce ADHD symptoms. Now, her mission is to help families reduce ADHD symptoms naturally so that children with ADHD can thrive at home, at school, and in life. And she's the author of the book called Thriving with ADHD, a guide to naturally reducing ADHD symptoms in your child. What kind of book? Talk to you. I have so many questions for you.
Thank you so much, Robin. I'm really, really happy to be here.
Oh my goodness. Now, ADHD, I think, can be misunderstood. I think that sometimes people think it's a catch-all. Sometimes people don't think it's a big deal, but it shows up in many different ways, can be really debilitating. And I've said this in a previous episode where, we know ADHD often comes with a friend, right? There's comorbidity that comes with ADHD, and it can be really difficult to parent through. So first off, let's just start with you. What was your experience with your child? Because you were not in this industry doing this work at all before you had a child with ADHD. Just like me, I did marketing before I was in this world of parenting, and so our kids are just such a gift. They make us, want to be better people, and you're the same. So tell me a little bit about your history.
Yeah, I was definitely not in this space. And if you ask any of my friends from high school who would be the least likely to end up in, holistic health and nutrition, they would all say me. I was actually an accountant. And I really had planned to be in that arena for my whole career. And I probably would have been if my concerns over my son's health hadn't grown as much as he did. I always had a feeling there was something a little bit different with him, even when he was like at the age of 2. Lots of activity, hyperactivity, bounce off the walls, never could sit still and eating dinner. And he'd have these meltdowns that would like go on for days and days. And it just basically put our whole family life on hold. And I would always ask the preschool teachers, oh, does he, do you notice anything different? They're like, no, he's just a boy. He's just a boy. He's just a boy. But eventually it all sort of caught up. And at the age of 4, that's when the teachers sort of started noticing differences as well. His tantrums became, even more severe. And we went to the doctor, and he was diagnosed with ADHD after, a number of sessions with a developmental psychiatrist in an analyzing whether or not his symptoms were normal for his age. And so he was diagnosed with ADHD, and, I felt relief, really, when he was diagnosed, because I knew I wasn't a bad mum. And, I could give myself permission to go, like, it's not my parenting. These meltdowns are part of the disease, the hyperactivity, the impulsivity, all of these things were part of what was going on in his body and his brain. And, I was relieved. We were also immediately put on medication. And at first I was excited about it as well. This is fine. We're finally going to get the help that we needed. And at first it was great. And, was playing nicely with his brother. He started to calm down. He could sit at the table and eat dinner. But then, it was great until it wasn't great, if you know what I mean. And his dosage started to increase, and he'd start to get all of these side effects. He wasn't able to eat. He couldn't sleep. He lost weight. So they gave another medication to counteract some of those side effects. And the doctor prescribed another prescription to counteract more side effects. And so he was on 3 strong meds at the age of 5. And when the doctor suggested the 4th medication to counteract some anxiety that popped up, like he wanted to put him on an SSRI, that's sort of when I said, this doesn't seem right. A 5-year-old on 4 strong medications. And that's when my career path completely changed. And I went back to school. I did my holistic health degree, multiple specific certifications in this particular area. And that's when I learned how food can affect so many aspects of our lives. And I began to learn that ADHD symptoms can be reduced naturally. Now, today my son is thriving. He's, almost 13. He's in middle school, and he hasn't been on meds for years.
Wow.
He's a straight A student, but that's really, that for me wasn't the biggest thing.
No.
The most important thing is he's happy, and my family's happy, and we've now got that peace and that calm in our house. That was all I wanted. I just wanted to enjoy my family life, which I didn't at all. And so once I learned all of this, once I saw the changes in my own family, I really couldn't keep that information to myself. I didn't want anyone else to have to go through the struggles and the challenges that my family went through. And over the years, I'm lucky enough to be able to help close to 1,000 other families sort of get to the same place as me, but just so much quicker.
Wow. Well, and your book is also an international bestseller, and it hasn't been out that long, which really says we're hungry for this information.
Yeah.
And it's new information for me. And look, when you have a kid with ADHD, although it can show up in different ways, a lot of times these kids are running the show because their needs are so big, so intense. Those meltdowns are big. The impulsivity gets them in trouble all the time. So they feel bad. Then their behavior just keeps going and going and going. And teachers don't understand. And then you're worried, and anxiety, like it just snowballs.
It does.
And if it's like, my child, who it has come with many different other diagnoses as well, it's so hard. It's exhausting for you and for your child. And I'm with you on those side effects. Some kids can't afford to lose any weight. We've seen a dramatic difference in my son's weight too, since he's been on meds. And I'll be really honest about that. He has. So, okay, let's talk about this and let's just dive right in. You really advocate for a food. Oh my gosh, I can't even say it. A food first approach. So
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about that. Like, what are some of the worst foods for kids in ADHD? So let's kind of start there.
Yeah. Look, I think for me, when I say a food first approach is that, when I started, when we went to the doctor, we were diagnosed with ADHD. The only course of action I was presented was medication.
Yeah.
I was only told about medication. As you said, you didn't know that food could have such a big change on a body. And unfortunately for us, the medication did more harm than good.
Yeah.
And I knew that something had to change. And when I learned about the effects of gut health on ADHD symptoms and how we heal the gut, ADHD symptoms are reduced or removed completely. And and how much food affects our gut health. And so for my son, medication didn't help him, food did. So that's why I recommend that food first approach to all of the families that I work with. I'm not against medication, but it should not be the first course of action, not when food can sometimes be even more effective and have absolutely no side effects to worry about. If parents want to reduce ADHD symptoms in their children, they must do something more than just give a pill or a supplement. Supplements can be really effective, so can medication. But if children continue to eat processed inflammatory foods like gluten, dairy, and soy, those ADHD symptoms are not going to go away because the food that they're eating are exacerbating those symptoms. So food first means that rather than trying to find a magical pill that's going to fix a child, we clean up their diet instead. And in doing this, we reduce inflammation in their body, in their brain, in their gut, and then the symptoms start to reduce because we're getting to the bottom of what's actually driving those symptoms in the first place. And I often like to think of it like this. When you're building a house, a solid foundation isn't optional, it's a necessity. If you don't have a solid foundation, that house isn't going to be very strong. And it's exactly the same way with us. Diet is our foundation. And if our diet is poor, we can never function at our best. And that's true for you and me as adults, but it's so true for our children as well.
Okay. So you're talking about the relationship between the gut and the brain, but also the relationship between the gut and inflammation. So is that where inflammation starts, is in the gut?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. A big part of, inflammation does start in the gut, but inflammation can be anywhere in the body and it can cause any type of symptoms. And I like to think of inflammation kind of like as this bucket, okay? We're all born with a metaphorical bucket, and our goal in life is to keep the load on that bucket low, and, we want to be born with an empty bucket, of course. But for some of our kids, they're actually born with stuff in their bucket already. So they start off in this world with a little bit of stuff in their bucket already. So for example, my son, sorry, there's a bit of a noise in the background. Sorry about that. For my son, he was induced early with medication. He went straight into the NICU with premature lung disease. He was put on medication. He wasn't breastfed. And so his bucket started with stuff in it. And what happens over time, in that bucket goes bad diet, toxin exposure, heavy metals from different things, and all this load on our bucket. And so some of us have really great genetics and we can empty our bucket out of our body really easily. So we can keep the load on the bucket low. And so things like bad diet don't have such a dramatic effect on everyone because they can keep their bucket low. They can empty it out of their body. They've got good detoxification pathways. But others have genetic, mutations in their body that affect their ability to empty their bucket effectively out of their body. Their detoxification pathways are compromised. And so what happens is all this load, it builds up, it builds up, it builds up in the body until the bucket becomes so full that it tips over, and
Mm.
all of that tips out into their body, causes inflammation and causes symptoms. And that's when symptoms come out. So the key through life is to reduce that load on the bucket, optimize detoxification pathways so you keep that inflammation low. And so that's how I like to think of inflammation. It's that load on the bucket. And the more that you have on that bucket, the more load, the more full it is, the more it will spill over and more symptoms will come out. And so people say to me all the time, well, this kid, it's exactly the same way as this kid, but this kid doesn't have ADHD. But this does. So why are you saying that, diet's going to work for this kid when it's clearly, why is everyone so different? That's why, because everyone has different genetics, even kids in the same family. One of my kids has ADHD, the other one doesn't. And so exactly. So it's exactly the same. Why does gluten affect one child, but it doesn't affect the other child? That's why.
Okay, well, doesn't most disease start with inflammation anyway?
Yeah, you're so right. Like every symptom pretty much that people have in disease is contributed to by inflammation in the body. So the key for healing any disease is reducing inflammation. And we can do that in a number of different ways, but a big part of that is food. So that's why I say food first, because let's try to reduce the inflammation in the body through diet, because what side effects come with diet? Why not try it? Why? It's okay. Yeah, it's not as easy as popping a pill, but there are no side effects. There's not going to be any negative effect of changing the diet. It's actually just going to optimize the body, optimize the brain. So why not start there?
Okay, wow. Okay, so we're talking about gluten, dairy, and soy. Are
Yeah.
those the main ones? Are there more?
Yeah, they're the main ones. There are more, artificial flavors and artificial colors and, preservatives, things like that. And also, refined sugar. So they're the key ones. But the top three are gluten, dairy, and soy. And that's because these are the top three culprits that are driving inflammation in the body. They're highly inflammatory. They can lead to an immune response and also something that's called increased intestinal permeability, which is known as leaky gut. And so, I recommend that families take them out of the diet along with, those artificial flavors, colors, preservatives, and excess sugar.
Okay. Um, so okay, great. I'm hanging off every word and I'm thinking, okay, how the heck do you get a child? And I'm going to talk about myself, my 17-year-old. How do you make these changes to the diet? Do you just go cold turkey on gluten, dairy, and soy? Do you how are we doing this? Because
Yeah, no,
it's not easy.
it's not easy and it seems like a lot, okay? When you look at it that way, it is a lot. However, it's just because it's the unknown right now. It's not your normal. You think about what you eat every week, okay? You make probably similar meals every week for dinner because that's what you're used to and that's your normal. So what we're going to do is we're just going to slowly change your new normal, okay? We're going to make something else your new normal. So, you might have Taco Tuesday on a Tuesday and but you can make tacos gluten, dairy, and soy free. So let's just do that first. Just focus there. And then when you're used to doing that, let's change breakfast. Okay. And once you're comfortable with breakfast, let's move to Monday night dinner. So we definitely do not need to make all these changes at once. I did that. I took out gluten, dairy, soy, artificial flavors, artificial colors, sugar, and 40 food sensitivities that came up on a food sensitivity panel. And I did this on day one. This is not the approach that I teach in my program. Yeah. I always tell families Rome wasn't built in a day, and transforming your family's diet won't be complete in a day either. It's not a race, it's a marathon, and it's okay to take it slowly. It's okay to take one step at a time. And if the pace that's doable for you and your life is one change a week, one change every 2 weeks, then that is perfectly okay. And so families really need to give themselves permission to take things slow and remember it's not a diet. It's not just a phase. It's a permanent lifestyle change. And when it becomes part of your lifestyle, it becomes second nature and changes don't seem as hard or overwhelming. And all of a sudden you turn around, you're like, well, this is our new normal. I don't even think about it anymore. And so and then someone would say, well, why don't you go back to eating gluten? Oh, well, I just can't even think about that now. Like I feel so good and I don't want to bring that in. And I'm used to cooking this way now. It's normal.
So here's what I wonder about, because you're talking about preservatives and artificial colors, flavors, that sort of thing. So I sort of see dairy and soy as interchangeable, right? Like if you're not going to eat dairy, then you're probably going to go to a soy substitute. But then I think, like, are we trading one thing for something else that's packed with preservatives, that's packed with different, food colorings and flavors and stuff like that? So I always wonder, like, if I'm eating turkey and then I eat tofurkey, is it, and I really don't know. And I'm asking you that. I know you're shaking your head, but it's a podcast. So I'm still going with my questions. I know that what you're going to say is no, but like, I wonder about trading one thing for something that is not, I don't, I want to be careful how I say it, but let me just say it like this, not real food. It's
Yes.
in my ignorant way to say it. That's more manufactured. I don't know.
Yeah,
Like,
no,
yeah. So
you're right. It's a good question. I always say replacing packaged foods with packaged foods is not going to get you anywhere. Gluten-free and dairy-free is not necessarily healthy. And so, the
right.
goal of this is not just to bring in a different type of packaged food. And, like I am a big proponent of like grass-fed animal protein. And, so definitely like, like that, whatever tofurkey or whatever you called it, that is something definitely you do not want to be
Well,
eating at
it's
all.
tofu,
Yeah,
yeah, which is
yeah,
soy.
which is soy, which we say take out the soy.
Yeah,
So look, it's definitely not about just what to take out. It's also about what to put back into the body.
exactly.
As far as what to eat, my best tip is to focus on those whole, nutritious, fresh fruits and veggies, grass-fed animal protein, so meat, poultry, seafood, eggs, and plenty of healthy fats like avocado oil, coconut oil, olive oil, because there are a lot of those other oils that are quite highly inflammatory as well. But you also want to be drinking plenty of spring water, so you're avoiding harmful chemicals that are in some waters. But also, water actually helps detox the body and remove the toxins that are already there. And so all these foods really provide our body and our brain and our kids' brain and our gut with the nutrients they need so they can function as best. And really, my rule of thumb is, if I buy a packaged food, if there's something on that ingredient list that I can't pronounce, it goes back on the shelf. And so, it's really not about like just replacing it with another packaged goods. In our program, we actually give everyone shopping lists to all of the major supermarkets and better for you alternatives. So yeah, there are better for you
Okay.
products out there, but it's not just about replacing something with a packaged good that's highly processed at all. It's really about what we can put back in to nourish that body, because it is that nourish. It's reduce the inflammation. It's restore all of those nutrients needed to foster emotional regulation and brain development. And then it's to renew the body and the family unit. So those are the three sort of R's that I sort of focus on in what we're doing here.
Okay. I love that. I love that. So for parents listening, I can see a couple questions coming up. One is, how fast can I see changes?
It's a really, really good question. It is different for everybody. For example, with my son, because I removed everything out on day one,
Yeah,
which
you did
again,
it
do
full.
not do. I had multiple panic attacks on the floor in my bedroom.
I bet.
Yeah, and so definitely don't do it that way. But for him, it was a matter of 2 weeks, and he was literally a different child. Like his meltdowns just disappeared. The biggest
Wow.
change that we see the quickest is the emotional dysregulation, the reduction in meltdowns, reduction in tantrums, the length of time, the severity, the frequency, all reduced. That's the first change that we see, which is the best, because like that's the hardest one to deal with. And so, you know, it's always nice to know that that's actually the first one to change. But look, for some kids, they're so highly reactive to, say, gluten, it can take 3 to 6 months for their body to you know, to really reduce that inflammation enough to allow the healing to occur. So like you know, as I said, with inflammation, what we're trying to do is reduce it enough to allow the healing to occur. And so gluten, dairy, soy, and these things are some of the things that are contributing to it. But it's not just about diet. It does go beyond diet and how we can reduce inflammation in other ways that all add to that inflammatory load on the body.
Okay. Okay. And of course it matters how quickly you bring things in
Yeah.
and make
And
those changes.
And
Yeah.
also the child, like their health history, like do they have, you know, when we're talking to families first off, we're looking into their health history. Is there something there that actually alerts us that something else could be going on deeper in the body that we need to investigate? Because I'd say about 50% of the families that we work with, we simply change the diet and we don't need to go further. The other 50% do have these extra underlying stresses going on in their body that we need to identify with lab testing and target specifically to reduce the inflammation enough to allow the healing to occur. And so that's when we sort of employ functional lab testing to go a bit deeper into that person's particular body.
Okay, so functional lab testing. I wanted to ask you about that because so there is a way to test for what? What are you looking for?
Yeah, so you know, I like to think of functional lab testing kind of like getting a microscope and looking deep into the body. And we
Okay.
use this testing to identify hidden stresses. And that could be hidden stresses in the gut. It could be hidden stresses. The detoxification pathways are not optimized, things like that. Nutrient deficiencies. And so we're really looking at hormone, the gut, inflammation, and other dysfunctions going on in the body. So there are 4 tests that I generally use as sort of like a high level view of what's going on in the body. There are way more, but I find these 4 give us a really great starting point. And a lot of the time that's all we need to do. You know, for some it may be a bit deeper, but most people this 4 is enough. The first test is a stool test, and it gives us a really clear picture of what's going on in the gut. And it looks
Yeah.
for things like parasites, bacteria, worms, yeast overgrowth, looking at, you know, intestinal health markers, inflammation, digestive enzymes. So like, are you digesting your fat well? So because we want our fat to be digested well so it can go up to our brain and help us function optimally. The next test that we use, and I'll talk about the gut-brain connection, but I'll just finish up on the testing. The next test that we use is a food sensitivity test that looks for inflammatory reactions in the body to certain food. And the important thing to remember is a food sensitivity, it's not a true allergy, but it does cause inflammation in the body. And so you can actually heal from the sensitivity. Once you can heal the gut, you can start to add those foods back in. The third test that we use is an organic acid test, and it's an awesome test because it looks at over 70 different important markers in the whole body and how it's functioning. It can show you the need for specific nutrients, such as B vitamins, which are really important for our compromised kids. Diet modifications, so extra things like oxalates and salicylates, detoxification pathways, neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, which, you know, are our happy feel good hormones in our body that help regulate our mood and maintain our mood balance. And some other markers in that as well. And the final test, not many people know about this test, but it's like one of my favorite for these kids. It's called a cryptopyrrole test. And pyrroles are a normal chemical byproduct in the body, and they attach to vitamin B6 and zinc, and they draw these elements out of the body when they're excreted through the urine. So if someone has elevated urine cryptopyrrole levels, it can result in a dramatic deficiency of zinc and B6. But it's frequently identified in behavioral disorders, ADHD, depression, aggression, violent behavior. So symptoms include things like poor tolerance to physical and emotional stress, poor anger control, mood swings, poor short-term memory, sensitivity to light and sound, tactile sensitivities, and a lot of those sound like ADHD symptoms, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the final test that we do, and they're all tests that are done at home. You don't need to go to a lab, and I work with people all across the US. You don't need to be in the same state.
What about your friends in Canada? Is that the same?
Yeah, Canada. That most of the tests can be sent to Canada. Some of them are a little bit harder to get there, but I do work with people overseas as well. We might just have to make some adjustments, but definitely can be done in Canada as well.
Mm. I have to say that because my son is so difficult to parent, I would say that food is sometimes a currency for us. And I don't think I'm alone. I think that, and look, I even say to parents, uh, if you can predict behavior that's coming and you can get ahead of it and you can say, you know what, I knew that, you needed help with this, or I know that putting your shoes and jacket on is really tough. And if you get in the car right now, there's a little surprise for you. And it's a little Hershey's kiss or something, right? So if you've got a kid with ADHD, you might be shooting yourself in the foot, right? And so like I just want to acknowledge that I know that I'm not alone in this. And I think that a lot of us have probably done that. I have said to my son, who is very resistant to going to therapy appointments, like, hey, dude, let's get a Slurpee on the way. Here's a treat on the way. I always would do that because that's how I get him to go. So I just want to say it's hard. And
It
what do
is.
you recommend for
Yeah.
somebody like me? And my kid's 17, right? So we're getting towards the end of those influential
Hmm.
years where I get to tell him what to do. And he's already saying,
Yeah.
the boss of me in a really powerful way right now. So what do you say about that?
Yeah, look, it is really common. And I think that as parents, it's not your fault. It's none of
Mm,
our fault. And we do what we need to do. And we
yeah.
know what we know. And so, I was the same. My son was on 3 strong meds. They wanted to put him on a fourth. I was like, eat whatever you want. I just don't want to deal with the battles. And so we need to actually like just not blame ourselves to start, because it
Mm,
really isn't our fault. And I always again say Rome wasn't built in a day. You just want
mm,
to start to make small changes. One step forward is a step in the right direction. And so really just changing the script of like, I believe in positive, reinforcement for sure, but let's take food out of the equation and
mm,
do something different. And when I talked about the 3 R's before, where we're reducing the inflammation, we're
mhm,
restoring the nutrients needed to foster that emotional regulation and that brain development, and we're renewing the body and the family unit. That family unit is a big part of it. Okay. And so, how about, let's do something together as a family, as a reward instead. So to build that family camaraderie, let's, obviously with a 17-year-old, it's slightly different than if we had a younger kid. Like with a younger kid, it could be, let's have a game night or let's go to the movies together, because you want to actually bring in and renew and restore that family unit as well, because that's a big part of it. Our kids' nervous systems are regulated by us, and they're
yes.
regulated by our family unit as well. And
Mm,
so it is so
it's
important
huge.
not just to focus on food, or not just focus on supplements, or not just focus on one thing like therapy. It is all of these pieces of the puzzle that go together. But starting
Mm,
small. Now, with a 17-year-old, it brings its own challenges. They've got their own money. They can go off and do all of
mhm,
these things on their own. And so, you've got to have open and honest conversations with him.
mm,
Does he realize that the challenges that he has, does he like those challenges, or would he prefer himself to actually not have those challenges? And
mm,
so, and also, what motivates him? Is it that he's really into sport? And so, if he's at that point of like, I hate always getting into trouble. I don't like the fact that I'm getting bad at school, then you use that as the motivation to change the diet, or you use that as the motivation to start to implement these changes. This is why we're doing what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And when, kids that are that age, they need to understand the why, and that's the first thing that we actually teach in our program is the why. Why are these so bad for the body? What do they do to the body? And when you can understand the why, you're more likely to follow through. You're more likely to have chances of success. And he's like an adult now. So he
Mm-hmm.
should go through the same journey that the parents are going through in learning why we're doing what we're doing. And so getting their buy-in is super important at that age. It's a lot easier when they're younger than when they're 17. And so really getting them to understand why this is so important for them will actually help them. And, if they are into sports, it can be, this is going to help with your performance. This is going to, if you want to be great at whatever you do, then this is actually going to give you the nourishment that your body, that your brain, and everything needs to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I really love that you're talking about renewing your physical health and the family unit. I really love
Mm-hmm.
that because ADHD can really hurt a family.
It
It's
can.
not it may be the one child. And I mean, I said it earlier, right? They're driving the bus. They're the ones who are really
Mm-hmm.
in charge. And that can create resentment from parent to child, but also child to child, right?
Yep.
Siblings.
Yep.
It can fuel sibling rivalry. It can make it
Mm-hmm.
one child feel more loved or less loved. And so it is a really big deal. It's such a big deal. And I live it every day and I know
Mm.
how hard it is. And over time, you do end up doing what works for you and what good, bad, or indifferent, right? You just want to survive. You want to
Exactly.
do your best. And then you add COVID into the situation and, or to the equation. And what I hear you saying is it's the sum of all of the parts coming together to really create this new way and this new health for your
Yes.
child. And so my last question, and before I ask it, I just want to say to everybody listening, look, you are giving us some really helpful stuff. There's something for the parent toolbox that I want everybody to get. I've looked through it. It's fantastic. And there's already so many ideas that I have with it. So I'm really excited. And so what I want to ask you, first, I'm going to say, when I look at what my son and his diet, I see us getting those 4 tests, those
Mm-hmm.
you call them functional lab tests, or they're called that. I really do see that as being something that we've never had done, which makes me frustrated and could have really helped. Like we have done everything.
Mm-hmm.
We did everything before we did medication, but not this because
Yeah.
nobody mentioned this. I didn't know
I
this. I had
know.
no
I
idea.
know.
So I'm frustrated as I say this. But what I want to say is I look at his diet and I look at, kind of what we eat and I can just see starting off with changing breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
We've already, like my husband and I have already talked about, how breakfast kind of works in the morning on a day-to-day school day basis. And we're both not happy with it.
Mm-hmm.
We take care of ourselves in a different way, but our kids, we kind of do like what's fast, what's easy, what'll get you downstairs to actually eat. But what I've learned over the years is that my kids, and I'll just speak for my kids, is that they actually really like healthy food. They love it. They're
Mm-hmm.
excited. And my oldest, who's the tough one, he gets really excited over these super healthy meals that we make. And so that's very encouraging to me.
That is so encouraging, and I think that you'll have no trouble then if you've got that starting point.
Yeah. Well, and so what I want to ask you is, we've said it's the sum of all of the parts. It's about really knowing, getting the testing done that you need to get done, having a diet. How much of this, like, does the diet have to be 100% all the time? Can you have a cheat day? Can he go to McDonald's, which is where he works? Can he go to McDonald's and have like a McChicken or a Big Mac or whatever, and be okay?
A very, very good question. And so when it
Heavy sigh over here.
when your body is in a state of inflammation, as I've been saying, the key is to reduce that inflammation to allow the healing to occur.
Mm,
Now, if we are in the state of trying to reduce inflammation to allow the healing to occur, having there, we can't ever reduce it enough. So with gluten, for example, the body can develop antibodies against gluten. One of them in particular is called glutamorphin, and the other one is called casomorphin. Sorry, casomorphin is from dairy. Glutamorphin and protonorphin are from gluten. And what happens is, if you've developed these antibodies against gluten, every time you eat gluten, you're actually creating neuropsychological symptoms from it. So things like depression, mood swings actually come from eating gluten. But what can also happen is, when you've got these antibodies, you're at a greater risk of having something called gluten detox. And so when you go on a gluten-free diet, you will have increased mood swings, you will have increased depression, changes in stool. But if you are doing a week of no gluten, you're going through gluten detox during that week, and then if you have gluten again, you start back where you were. And then the next week, you've got to go through that gluten detox. And so you're constantly in this tug of war between being gluten-free and not gluten-free. So you're never actually going to finish the detox. You're just going to be constantly in that detox, and it's not going to work. And so really, for this to work for the period of time, you need to be 100% gluten-free, 100% dairy-free, and 100% soy-free. I say that no one should be eating gluten ever. It is so highly inflammatory. It is the root of so many diseases out there.
Really?
And yeah, I will never eat it. I will never suggest to anyone eat it. I'll never suggest to add that back in. And when you see the number of tests that I have done and actually looked at the reactivity of these kids with gluten and wheat, it's just through the roof. And so it is it drives leaky gut. And we haven't actually talked about the gut-brain connection. It's massive, and when you've got leaky gut, that then travels, all that toxins and all that inflammation travels through the gut, in the lining, up to the vagus nerve, into the brain, and causes all of these issues. And so the main area that talks to the gut is the frontal lobe, and the frontal lobe is involved in things like attention and focus and executive function and planning. And organizing, which are all areas that kids with ADHD struggle with. So, the gut talks to the brain via two-way chemical messengers and nerve branches. So when you've got that leaky gut, you've got that leaky brain. Okay, you can understand why you've got those symptoms. And the other thing is, with the gut, 95% of serotonin and 50% of dopamine, which, as I mentioned earlier, are our happy, feel-good hormones in our body that maintain our mood balance, they regulate our emotions, they promote our cognitive function, and they're made in the gut. 95% of serotonin is made in the gut. 50% of dopamine is made in the gut. Goodness. So if your gut's broken down, you can't regulate your emotions. You can't balance your mood.
Wonder.
And so gluten creates leaky gut in everyone. And for some, it's more. For some, it's temporary. And I bring it back to that bucket, okay? For some of us, it will create a temporary leaky gut. But because we can, detoxify out our stuff, we can, heal our body okay because of our genetics, it's not going to cause such a long-term issue. But for most of our kids, it does. And so it needs to stay out. Dairy is a different story. Once we can reduce inflammation, I think I'll take it back to with my son. About 18 months into our journey, we tested back goat's milk and goat's cheese, which is the least reactive and the least inflammatory out of all of them. And he did fine. So every now and again, we'll have goat's cheese and goat's milk. We don't go take it any further with proper dairy because of just health reasons. That's what I've decided. When you think about it, baby cow, which is obviously what's needed to drink, you drink the adult cow milk, they grow to an adult sized cow within 12 months. Okay, so the growth factors and the hormones inside cow's dairy is actually designed to get a baby cow to an adult sized cow in 12 months. We as humans grow to an adult size in 21 years.
Yeah.
So the growth factors and the hormones inside cow's milk are not designed for our body. So for health reasons, we've made that personal decision, and that's everyone. But, I always say get to a good place first, then let's test it back in and see how we go. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. And we haven't, I don't drink milk, and it's because for that reason, to be really open and honest is, I've always looked at milk being for baby cows, not for
Yep.
humans, right? Yeah. Um, and you do the best you can, right?
Yes, you
So
do.
okay, so I one last question. So those functional lab tests, which seem really, really important to me, things that
Mm-hmm.
and I'm saying it because it was never offered to me. So for people who want to have those tests done, do they talk to their doctor? Do they talk to their pediatrician? Do they contact you? How do they get the lab
Mm-hmm.
requests in order to get tested?
Look, unfortunately, these are like that more holistic approach, and they're not the traditional approach. The traditional approach is sort of like a disease management industry rather than a health industry. It's
Mm-hmm.
really about labeling with a diagnosis and giving a pill to match that diagnosis, that DSM code, for insurance companies. And
Yeah.
so, when you've got healthy people, you don't need medicine, you don't need the pharmaceutical companies, you don't need the insurance companies. And so, unfortunately, the way the medical industry is here and in a big part of the world is that really they don't want healthy people. They don't need healthy people. The pharmaceutical companies are driving the industry. I just did a live masterclass last week, and pharmaceutical companies spend 4 times as much on marketing than they do on research. So 4 times more on marketing than they do on research. And so, which is scary because, you think about like what are in these drugs that are going into our bodies, and they spend 4 times as much on marketing. I don't know if you've watched the Netflix show Dope Sick, or Hulu. I don't know if it's on Hulu or
Mm,
it is. Uh, it blew my mind,
mm,
and I am so not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not into all of that sort of stuff. I'm very balanced, in my beliefs and things like that. But this was just a real eye opener of what the pharmaceutical industry does here in the US. And it's like that all across in Western world. So but unfortunately, they're not covered by insurance, and so they're not available to everyone because they can be expensive. And
mm.
it's really, really unfortunate. And I could help so many more families if that wasn't the case. So you probably won't have much luck going to your doctor, and they'll be like, "Oh, none of that, none of that works." I remember going to our pediatrician saying, "Look, I've read a lot about gut health and gut brain connection." They're like, and I'm like, how diet can affect the body. And he's like, don't bother. None of that works. Now, he's the one that was prescribing my son, the fourth medication to treat the symptoms of the other 3 medications. Let's just say I don't have the same doctor anymore because I can clearly show you that he does. I mean, if you go onto my website and look at the numbers of families that we have helped step off
Mm,
that emotional roller coaster, it's
it's huge.
it's and as you were saying it earlier, it's well, for me, it makes me angry
Mm,
because it's like, why isn't this offered? Why isn't this talked about? Because it is just amazing the changes that you can see in a child with just food. So it is just food. That's it, just food,
um,
and a couple of supplements. But it's just, it makes me really angry and frustrated,
mm,
just like you were, because why isn't this mainstream? So, a long way to answer your question. Unfortunately, most doctors will not, give you these tests. You might be able to find a naturopathic doctor in your
mm,
area that will, but a lot of them also don't specialize just in ADHD. And when
mm,
we look at these tests, we're looking at patterns that go through, across all tests. I've had a lot of families that have come to me that have run like an organic acid test with their naturopath, and the naturopath is like, oh well, this is low, give some B6. This is high, do this. But it's not just about that. Or they say, they look at it and go, oh, oxalates are high. Oxalates are a chemical compound found in many healthy foods. And so they'll say, go on a low oxalate diet. But no, if you've done a lot of these tests, you'll realize that yeast in the gut and mold in the body produces elevated levels of oxalate. So let's fix the root cause of the yeast or the mold, and then you don't need to go on a low oxalate diet. So there's these little intricacies, and it's finding the right practitioner that can work with your family that really understands this. The amount of money that I spent before I was able to get to where we got to, I mean, I could put both kids through college, And the reason that I got into doing what I'm doing is because it was just so difficult for me. It just doesn't need to be that hard for other people. So I'm a naturopath. I work with families all across the US, so families can look up my website and just find someone that really knows what they're doing and specializes in this area.
Okay, well, I can't thank you enough for this information. I think it's so important, and thank you for the work you're doing.
You're
And
welcome.
thank you for what you've given us in the toolbox, which is kid-friendly breakfast recipes. And it's not just one or two; it is a whole heck of a lot of them, from smoothies to muffins to um, uh, overnight oats to
Yes.
a bunch of different things that will really help you and will really help your child. And what a great way to start the day with something that is good for your gut, helps you to learn, stay focused, and have attention. So, wow, this has just been so good, selfishly for me, to really understand what's going on with my child, even more on a level that I didn't have before, and I thought I did everything. So it's great that you're here. I wish I knew you 12 years ago, but here we are, right? So thank you so much. Now, for anybody who wants to know more about Dana, she is at her website is ADHDthriveinstitute.com. You can also find her on Facebook. She's facebook.com/ADHD Thrive Institute. So just look for ADHD Thrive Institute
Yes.
and you'll find her. And then her book, Thriving with ADHD, A Guide to Naturally Reducing ADHD Symptoms in Your Child. And we didn't touch on this, but what's good for your child is also good for you, because so many parents find out that they have ADHD right alongside their child having ADHD as well. So this will help with you as well. And I confirmed that with you before we hit record, so that just doesn't come from me. It is you that says this as well, and it just makes sense, right? If you're reducing inflammation for anybody, and let's be honest, we could all use less, because again, it is the start of all diseases from inflammation. So, my goodness, thank you so much for your work. Thank you for being here. I am better for knowing you, and you're just gonna have to deal with me updating you all the time on what's going on in my family, because I need somebody like you. You are whether you like it or not, you are the newest member of our team in our family to help us, because this is just invaluable information,
Yeah.
and we all deserve harmony in our home, and our kids deserve, and we deserve to have that. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been super fun.
Thank you for listening to this edition of my podcast, Parenting Our Future. I'm parent coach Robbin McMahon, and if you're enjoying this podcast, please share it with someone who you think might also need to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe, and if you like my work, I'd be grateful if you gave me a 5-star rating. For those of you who like my content and want more, visit me at yellingcurebook.com to get your copy of my book and to find other resources to help you. Until next time, I am wishing you and your family peace and connection.